Well, welcome everyone. I understand you've been here enjoying Communicate 2023 all day. I'm Pete Williams. I'm the head of PR at the Soil Association. So I'm very delighted to join you for this session, which is farming in the media, a really sort of well anticipated session. And I'm sure you're all going to have lots of questions for our panel. I shall quickly introduce the panel and then they'll introduce themselves, talk to you a little about their perspectives on farming in the media, and then we'll open to questions from the floor and from online viewers as well. So on our left, we've got Dimitri Houtart, who is the head of BBC Rural Affairs, and then Anna Jones from Just Farmers, and we'll hear all about them shortly. And then Humphrey Lloyd, who's a farmer in Winford at Hares farm, just south of Bristol. Yeah. Cool. So we know that many environmental organisations are seeking to engage with farmers and landowners to varying degrees. And we believe that our audiences, as well as the sector, can get many perspectives on farming and agricultural issues through mainstream and social media. But really we want to address in this session sort of questions around, I have to put my glasses on, I'm afraid. Where do farming stories come from in the UK? Where do most people interact with narratives around food, farming, production, and the role of landowners in nature's recovery, which is so critical at this time? We're going to consider whose voices are we hearing, not hearing, what limitations are there on the media outlets, and how we can bring in sort of broader environmental sector, as well as the crisis we face in health, in nature, and in the environment itself, and maybe consider issues around trust. Sort of often farmers feel kind of under attack by the media and stereotypes. So how can we build trust? So really, I'd like to start with Dimitri. If you'd like to introduce yourself and perhaps talk to us about where those farming stories are coming from.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah, so as Pete mentioned, I'm at the BBC where I cover rural affairs, and I'm also executive for rural affairs, food, environment, and natural history. So mostly for network radio station, mostly Radio 4. And probably more interesting for you for the last 18 months as well, I spend my time also writing an academic thesis looking at how we can best engage more reluctant audience when it comes to the environment, which I'll share a little bit of that in my opening presentation, which hopefully will be quite useful to share and discuss after if you wanted to. But I think how we produce food, how we farm, how we look after our countryside is probably one of the most important issues humanity is facing right now. And we have huge challenges when it comes to developing new food systems. And I'm sure everybody in the room here knows the number. 70% of our land in the UK is farmland. Globally, a third of greenhouse gas emission is produced by the food system as a whole, not just farming, but the whole food system. So how we use land and the demands on it we put keeps on changing as well, which is really challenging for farmers and for us as storytellers. Just as a brief kind of summary of the last two centuries, in the 19th century, the land was providing everything we needed, building material, food, fibers, fuel. Then post World War II, it changed to mostly a focus on producing as much food as we could. And now especially in the last 10 years, there's again a huge shift where, we're asking farmers to produce food, to store carbon, to increase biodiversity. And so there's in history, it keeps on changing. And now we're again, a really tough time for the farming community, in order to achieve everything we demand from them. So communicating those challenges to the wider public is extremely important. And, it's something we try to do with my teams in our program. So I've got a program on Radio 4 every day called Farming Today, for example. And you know, farming today is not for farmers, by the way. Farming today, I'm very clear with the team, is a specialist program for general audience. We reach 1.5 million individual listeners every week. And that's because we aimed at a general audience. There's only around 275,000 farmers in the UK, something like that. So, you know, see, if only farmers was listening to us, there would be, I mean, there would be a small minority. But we also know that we are now in a very challenging time when it comes to a reasonable and informed debates. Social media favor binary views, where the only way to cut through seems to have extreme positions on one side or the other. And there's a lot of, it builds a lot of echo chambers around their views as well. And so it's something that, you know, and I'm sure you'll talk about, but, you know, she's written a brilliant book about those kind of divide, and she's just done a fantastic series on Radio 4, which I'm sure you've all listened before coming here. He wasn't there last week. Battleground on in the countryside. You need to listen to it after. It was last week on Radio 4, available on BBC Sound right now. So but everybody here has got in the room has got a huge role to play to ensure that somehow we're able to inform the wider public on one of the most important issues we're facing. How can we engage the wider public in those debates and conversation while keeping a courteous tone? How do we cut through without the needing to have unnecessary divisive approach? How we encourage those informed debates and based on facts and not ideology. I mean, a lot of the ideological debates are really difficult and tough. And as you all know, great stories come from the ground, from farmers, from landowners, conservationists. But we need to be wary, and this is where I'm going to start bringing my academic side on it and my academic research. We need to be wary of doom and gloom and any finger wagging. Constantly highlighting the problem and the impending gloom makes a large section of the audience completely switch off, and you end up only reaching with the converted. So while we do need to illustrate the problems, we also need to showcase the solution and celebrate the wonder of nature and the people behind the solutions. And in order to do that, you need to know your audience, what's your messages and who is the message for. But most importantly, what is the aim of your communication plan? The aim could be just to ensure that your organization is talked about in the media, so you're seen as relevant by your stakeholders, by basically show your members and supporters that you play a role in the debate, and that's a valid aim. Or your aim may be to influence public opinion, which probably sometime you're quite keen to do. And that's really a subject I find fascinating. Now the question will be, who are you trying to influence? Is it politicians and decision makers and opinion formers? Or is it maybe, maybe because there's an upcoming legislation coming that you want to influence? Or is it to influence your existing followers or supporters? Or is it to influence that section of society for whom environmental concern is not at the top of their priority, so their agenda? That section, I call them the fence sitters, is following another academic paper, which was quite, but basically they're people, they believe in climate change, but they will tell you, oh yeah, but China is still building a coal power station, me changing like that's not going to do anything. So how do we reach those? How do you reach those? And let me give you a quick example and then I'll finish, sorry, I'll move on. Let's take an example of wind turbines, for example. Your aim is to have more of the general public to get behind wind turbines. So one way you could do that to try to sell your story is the urgent change needed for ongoing combat against climate change, transition towards renewable, it's exciting journey towards net zero, move away from fossil fuel, which is desperately needed. And you'll probably try to get somebody like Dale Vince or you, Fernley Whittingstall, to be the person fronting the story. This should work pretty well for your converted audience. But if your aim is to reach the kind of fence-sitter audience, those people who don't really think too much about climate change, this will be a disaster. It won't work at all. And the reason is, their view, what we find exciting for change. I'm assuming everybody here is in the converted side, by the way. But what we find exciting about change and going toward net zero is actually a switch off for those audience. So, you know, already the idea of change and saying we need to change for, you know, wind turbine and renewable, that's already a switch off. But you can still sell the same story. You just need to sell a different part of the story. What you could do is frame it slightly different by saying, you know, the UK has always been a world leader since the Industrial Revolution, you know, in innovation. This is actually a continuation of our innovation for us to stay a world leading power. So instead of talking about change, we're talking about continuity and tradition, which really resonate with that audience. Instead of selling the environment benefits of moving to green energy, which again is something that will get the fence sitter, will not get the fence sitter excited. You can sell the core benefits. So what you're doing is actually, you know what, digging gas and oil in the UK is not going to reduce you electricity bill, by the way, because gas and oil digged in the UK will be sold on the global markets, and it's going to make no difference in your energy bill. Building wind power, on the other hand, will go straight into the grid. That, in the long term, will help reduce your electricity bills. So you don't sell the green change, you sell the core benefit of cheaper bill. And finally, and then I'm done, sorry. Finally, instead of using Dale Vince, those fence sitters like to be able to identify themselves with the hero, with the people fronting, and they don't want to have what they would say yet another environmentalist telling them what to do. So find somebody who they can identify with for the story. So in conclusion, so same story, same aim, but two completely different approach depending where you would want to go. So I think I've slightly diverted, but hopefully some practical tips for
Brilliant.
everyone.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. I think something to bear in mind when we're pitching stories to farming today. Thank you for sure. Anna, I think you want to develop on this really sort of, can I ask, who do we currently hear from in the world of farming, and who don't we hear from? And why is it so critically important to hear a variety of voices?
Thank you very much, Pete. So I'm Anna. I'm a journalist, a programme maker and a broadcaster, and I've been doing that in the rural affairs space for nearly 20 years. And I worked with Dimitri for a long time. And about 10 years ago, I started to notice it was getting harder to get farmers to talk on the record, because there were some genuine fears of being targeted as a result of sticking their head above the parapet, and just a deep distrust in the media, which they saw as pursuing an anti-farming, pro-environment agenda that was against them. And for me as a journalist whose job is to represent both sides of the debate, that was a real worry for me. That is a threat to free speech. And I wanted to make sure that all players feel that they can have their voices heard. So I did a Nuffield scholarship looking at what those barriers are, what is driving that disconnect, what is driving that distrust. And it revealed a lot of problems. And I'll come on to Just Farmers, which I set up to try and provide, in some way, a positive solution to that. But who we're hearing from, I call them the usual suspect, which will be industry bodies, unions, member organizations, NGOs, lobbyists, columnists, campaigners, even TV presenters. The slick, the savvy, the trained and experienced communicators with a message and a line that they can push until the cows come home. They are two a penny, and they are clamoring, banging at the door for us to put them on the radio or put them on the telly. The people that we're not hearing from, particularly, and this panel is in the context of farming, are those on the ground at the grassroots doing the job day in, day out. They're not the politicians, they're not the lobbyists, they are the ordinary, everyday farmer or grower. And yes, it does matter, because when people on the ground don't feel heard, it pushes them more to the extremes. It pushes them more to feel that there is an agenda against them. And it is demotivating and makes them feel that they have no place, they have no voice. So what I've done to try and help, and actually in an environmental context, I wanted to add, farmers and growers often find themselves in the defensive position, reacting to something. They're very rarely the proposer of a story or on the front foot. They're pretty much always on the back foot. They're responding to something. And that could be a campaign agenda or new scientific research. And what tends to happen as farmers see it is campaign agendas get mixed up with scientific research, and for them, they can't always see the difference. So let's take the meat debate, for example. There is a solid science-based argument for reducing meat consumption. There is also, as Dimitri pointed out, a very powerful ideological, dare I say, dogma-based argument for eliminating meat completely from our diets. And if you're a livestock producer, it feels so personal that sometimes it's difficult to separate those and to see where the difference is. It's just coming at you as just one big attack. And that's why they tend to have the same knee-jerk defensive reaction to both of those scenarios. So at Just Farmers, this is an attempt to try and help farmers understand how the media works, what makes a story, why we are reporting what we're reporting, and how they can be part of that and feel like they have a voice. So we run workshops, media. I don't call it media training. I hate media training. As a journalist, if I get offered someone who's media trained, my heart sinks to my boots. I just think, oh God, another slick person who's going to give me a message over and over again. This is media education. It's more like journalism training. We teach the farmers what is a story, how you tell a story, to develop their own sense of news judgment and editorial sense, and to understand where a journalist is coming from, so they don't see us as the enemy. And then we have a website where members of the media can register, and then they can contact those farmers when they're looking for an independent case study who doesn't come with an industry agenda, who can just talk as an ordinary, normal, grassroots farmer like Humphrey, who will speak in a minute. So yeah, we do our first workshop in Bristol. I think it's really important to get farmers off the farm and into the city, and where they do sort of interview exercises. And then the second workshop is much more practical, cameras, microphones, all of that on a farm in Staffordshire. So this project has been, this is some of the feedback we've had from members of the media about what we're doing. And this, I just want to leave you with this about who farmers are and how they feel. I was on the train this morning to a farmer who runs a big scale business in the Y catchment in Herefordshire. He's running a poultry system, large scale arable, the systems that you hear about as the big polluters. He is a manager of a system like that. And he's applied to be part of Just Farmers, which for somebody running an intensive large scale business is a really, really brave thing to do. And this is what he said about why he wants to be involved. I get frustrated and disillusioned by the general public's outlook on farming and their lack of understanding for the countryside. Because they have read a loaded column online, they believe negative views on agriculture, but with no counter literature, there is little persuading people otherwise. When I speak to people, it is possible to fill in the gaps in their knowledge, explain things, and sometimes change a point of view. I would like to be able to do it better and maybe have the opportunity to do it more. We farm within the Wye River catchment. Phosphates in the water are contributing to the decline in biodiversity within the river, and farmers are one of the sources of this issue. It is too simplistic and frankly deflective to say that the phosphates are coming from sewage works. This may be true, but we as farmers in the catchment are contributing too. There are no regulations as such that are stopping us from largely carrying on farming as we see fit. NVZs and farming rules for water are good, but only a start. We are taking the initiative by cover cropping, adding organic manures to the soil, reducing tillage, increasing productivity of grass lays, improving deck drainage, and keeping cattle out of waterways, just to name a few. I wish more farmers took responsibility for their actions and perhaps appreciated the environmental impacts of what they're doing. It is certainly not helping our image. And that is not extraordinary. I hear voices like that from the grassroots of our farming industry all the time, who recognize their contribution to the problems, who want to be part of the solution, but are held back by fear. Fear that the world is against them, fear that the media is against them, fear, quite frankly, that you guys in this room are against them. And I think it's time to show them that we're all part of this and we're all in it together.
Thank you, Anna. The Soil Association actually has around 25 farmer ambassadors who had some of Anna's storytelling training, and we use them to talk peer-to-peer from farmer to farmer, as well as fielding media interviews. And really, the Soil Association is all about shifting to a nature-friendly farming and food system, and coming up with solutions from the ground up. So we listen to those farmers, and those farmer voices and stories are so key to actually communicating and getting across to your audience. So thank you very much. Next up, Humphrey. So a real farmer voice here. I think what really concerns you is sort of the connection between the environment movement and the media narrative. Do you want to tell us some of your views around that?
It's almost as if those questions planted 2 minutes before this talk began. Yeah, that's great. It's great to share a panel with you guys as representatives from the media. And as Peter's just said, I'm a small-scale horticulture farmer. So I represent not only farmers, but specifically the small scale and a farmer who's doing agroecological farming, okay, which is a really important concept that I think hasn't filtered through into the media narrative sufficiently enough. And so I'm going to unpack that a bit later on. I'll start off by just saying that if we went back to like the mid-19th century, almost 50% of people in this country would be working in farming. Therefore, public perception and understanding of farming, soils, etc., was pretty high. Now it's less than 1%. So the public understanding is pretty low. And most people's perception of farming is filtered through, you know, the people on the panel with me represent. Media narratives, documentaries, podcasts, newspaper articles, okay? My understanding of it is the influence of the environmental movement has basically had a positive, but not entirely positive, impact on these narratives, and there's somewhere that they need to go, okay? The success of the environmental movement has basically allowed the public to have a pretty good understanding of the environmental, less the social, but definitely the environmental impacts of big ag on the environment, yeah? Things like nitrate runoff into waterways, you know, the association of like cattle ranching with deforestation in the Amazon basin, methane from cattle. These things are now like understood by the general public, but often, as has been mooted, the kind of like the way this filters through into the mind of the public is a kind of knee-jerk reaction against the farming community. Okay. I was working quite a lot with an organisation called the Land Workers Alliance, which is a small-scale union representing farmers and growers in the UK, but part of a larger scale organisation called La Via Campesina, which represents more than 2 million peasant farmers, 200 million peasant farmers globally, okay? We were working quite a lot with DEFRA around Brexit, and when DEFRA was trying to come up with its new suite of agricultural subsidies in the light of leaving the EU, okay? Because obviously it was dominated by the Common Agricultural Policy before that, and the UK government had to come up with something new. And in that moment, in that sort of political moment, what was really apparent was that the role of the environmental lobby group, yeah, the conservation organisations, the wildlife organisations, had gained massive political traction, okay? And their influence on government was very significant, and that was basically good. Although, as I'll come on to say, it's still not perfect, okay? And therefore, the new subsidy system that we are now moving into working out, I am personally, as a farmer, working out how to access it, the ELM scheme, which you'll all know about, has definitely been heavily influenced by the rewilding, conservation, lobby, okay? But there's a problem, okay? And the problem is that despite the power of the environmental movement, the lack of understanding of farming on the ground, which goes back to the fact that only 1% of us work in the sector, misses a really important nuance that I think should be at the heart of our vision for a better food system and should be at the heart of media narratives about the food system. Does that make sense? Okay. And what that is this, right? Not all farming is the same. Okay. Agroecology, which I'm going to sort of explain a bit and unpack a bit, should be at the heart of all media representations of farming. And the crucial difference is this, okay? It comes down to labour and the amount of work hours that are going into the food system and are going into the farms, right? The mindset that we currently get from the media, I think, is that farming is trashing the environment, therefore we need more nature recovery, rewilding, set aside, therefore we need less farms and we need less farmers. By contrast, an agroecological vision of the food system, and therefore an agroecological narrative that underpins a vision of a better food system, is different. It's we need more farmers and we need more farms, and they need to be smaller scale and more labour intensive and less capital intensive. And through this system, rather than setting aside a load of area to be conservation over here, whilst maintaining the corporate industrial food system over there, rather, we proliferate thousands and millions and billions of small farms on the ground with loads of people working on them. So this answers the social question of it because there's more agricultural labour. And in so doing, the greater ratio of labour allows for the incorporation of biodiversity and conservation into the productive farms, right? And that allows us to get this triple win of sustainable food production with biodiversity in a working landscape that the people are not removed from. The people are more reintegrated into through rural jobs and jobs on farms, okay? And that vision of agroecology is still almost non-existent in mainstream media, in my opinion, okay? And that sort of understanding of the nuance of getting more labourers onto the farms, getting more people into the landscape, thus enabling biodiversity on farms, is the shift that the media narrative now needs to make if we as a public are going to get behind the kind of radical shift in the countryside that we need.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Humphrey. Interesting social perspective. So now the opportunity is over to you to ask some questions of the panel, and maybe we can dig deeper into some of these issues. Is anybody a question? Yes, please. I think. Go for it. Sorry, I thought somebody.
Hi. Hi. My name is Tara. I'm here from Black Seeds Network and also with Bristol University hat on. And my work is in engagement and innovation. And I'm just picking up through all the different lenses you're speaking from, and from what I see here. There's a lack of diversity that's that you can't see with the eye. That you can see with the eye. It's a lack of visually diversity, and I'm just wondering if we're still at the stage where we're just touching the surface of all this, because we're not. These empty seats shouldn't be empty, and if they're empty, then it goes back to basic community engagement. I'm sorry, I missed your name. What's your name? The last
Humphrey.
Humphrey. Sorry.
You know me, I'm the guy from the film. You're on.
So so I'm just wondering if, like you said, it goes back to people, having the right people in these spaces. Usually when we invite people through, in terms of coming to engage with us about any topic, the first people we go to are the anchor organizations, and to me, they are very useful, but they're also gatekeepers to the people that are on the ground doing real work. Like we have Amrish here, who's doing work. He's going to do a workshop later around his rainforest work. He's from the grassroots community. He's from St. Paul's, where I'm also from. And the city is very, very divided. Sometimes, I work in Clifton and I go back to St. Paul's every day. So I live 2 different lives, and then I'm Kurdish on top of that. That's a whole other life. But I'm always, wherever I am always that one person like Amrish and Judith, where we are, you know, what you would call the reluctant voices or the voices that don't show up in those conversations, but it's not because we're reluctant. So there's just something, I don't know if it's a question or a statement I'm making, that we're not reluctant. It's just the conversations around us, the conversations that we want to be in, they're not meeting us at where our starting point is. And in terms of farming, for us, for my family, farming is, you do it with your eyes closed.
Yeah.
We don't learn from books. So there's a lot of talent there that I think we're missing out on, because we, as us, we're not on the ground. We're not going beyond the anchor organizations. And I'm just wondering why.
Yeah.
The same conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
I'd love to take that question, because diversity and bringing more of it, not just into farming, but into our rural communities, is something I'm really passionate about. And there's a whole chapter about diversity in my book, Divide, sorry to get another plug in, which was an extraordinarily difficult chapter to write as a white woman. So I lent on a lot of friends to help me with that chapter and to help me try and understand what the barriers are. And yes, farming is the whitest industry in this country, but second is environmental work. So we've got a real big problem on our hands. And one thing I'd like to bring you from the coalface, from the farming world, is that it is alive as an issue. And there's some amazing activism going on within the farming world. I'm a Nuffield farming scholar, and I'm going down to the Nuffield conference after this in Exeter. And one of my fellow scholars is Navaratnam Prathiban, who's a Sri Lankan farm vet who has just really turbocharged the grassroots movement to drive more diversity, not just in farming, but at conferences. The Oxford Farming Conference has now got its Inspire programme, which has welcomed people of colour from the veterinary profession, farming profession, urban growing. You know, it is really happening. And yes, it's happening slowly. 98% of people of colour live in urban areas. Farming is still a predominantly rural job, but it is happening. Those conversations are being had. Please take heart that we know the problems, and we're trying our best. And at Just Farmers, we're now thinking we have got the diversity that we have in Just Farmers, I have to say, is twice that is in farming as a whole. So we're doing really good work. We're ahead of where farming is as an industry. But I think in order to make sure that we have new voices, new faces, I think we probably need to start going to urban growing projects. And we do need to go into St. Paul's, and we need to say, you're an urban gardener, an urban grower. How do you feel about joining a workshop where you'll be sat next to a dairy farmer from Carmarthenshire and a beef farmer from Dumfries and Galloway? And it's free. Everything's free. I think one Just Farmers is completely funded by charitable donations. There's no cost to any of our farmers because it is not a well-paid industry. Farming, this idea that farmers are rich, get that out your head. Yes, some, but the ones that are can probably afford their own PR and media work. We exist for those family farms that don't have money. And and what we can even help with travel costs. Our first workshop is in Bristol. So, you know, perfect.
Anna, yeah, quickly, Humphrey.
So thanks for the question. I think if you're running a farm that's ostensibly public facing, like a community farm, it's very easy to just like open the doors, do what you think is cool and interesting and engaging, and expect people to flood in. Whatever. So you open the doors and like whatever, like have a barbecue and make a pizza oven or whatever. But you're probably only engaging like the small subset of the community that you personally represent. And that's why like basically we need people like you to like help people like us if we're going to be doing a public facing thing to get the tone right, to get the activities right, to get the food right. Yeah, stuff as basic as that. But it's kind of, you know, as you glean from what I was saying, like, I very much am a farmer that's part of a kind of like a vision for a kind of like a social movement for better farming. And that integrally has to be inclusive. And work needs to be done on it to get the tone right and to make the inclusion thing work. So yeah, we just
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to cut you a little bit short. I don't mean to be rude, but it would be good to get through as many questions as we can. I think we've got a question from online.
Just, yeah, well, time for one quick question from online. There's so much to be excited about in the regenerative farming space at the moment. Wild Ken on Springwatch, for example. How can we sense these stories and what platforms should we use?
Dimitri, can I ask?
I mean, you can use mine to start with. And we're doing a hell of a lot on regen at the moment. It's obviously the buzzwords in farming at the moment. So it's covered, you know, I've mentioned farming today. I've got a new farm. We covered that quite a lot on it. We just had the BBC Food and Farming Awards. The winner of the innovation category was regen. The challenge with regen as well, I mean, it's really, you know, important. You know, we talked about greener transition phase for the industry. The challenge is who get to define what regen is as well. So I was at the World Farming Organization General Assembly in South Africa in the early summer, which I chair. And on one of my panels had a delegate from Syngentus, and you know, everything they did was regen. So you know, who gets to define what regen? Should the Solar Association actually be on the front foot and define it?
They have a perspective.
Or can Syngenta define what regen is? So, but I'm not quite sure I quite answered the question. I'm sorry.
Yep. No.
Quick on that as well.
Yes,
Just
quickly.
a really quick one.
Yep, sorry.
It's not that regenerative and agroecological agriculture should take centre stage and sort of take over the media's coverage of farming. The issue with that is there are so many different systems, and it is impossible to say that's that, and that's that. Because this idea of industrial corporate agriculture, that's not a type of farm, that's a system where a 50-acre family farm with 6 beef cows and a small flock of sheep could be running an industrial corporate system in the sense that they're selling at local livestock market and selling to retailers. You know, this idea that large-scale corporate agriculture is only large-scale farms is a fallacy. It feeds right through from the biggest to the smallest. It is an all-encompassing system that has lots of different types of farms in it. So you can't separate things. You can't say that's regen, that's intensive, that's conventional, that's organic. They're all interlinked. And we have to break out of a siloed mentality. You know, we had the whole organic conventional row went on for years, never really achieved much. They just stayed in their own silos. Regen is an opportunity to get out of this is better than that and that's better than that. It's an opportunity to be less divisive and more inclusive of how we think about farming, because the big oil tanker, the big industrial system is changing. It will take time, and just batting it with a stick is not always the way.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we had a question on the floor. Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zoe Davis from the West of England Nature Partnership. And Anna, you've actually sort of just touched on what my question was about, which was nuance. Humphrey, I love the agroecological vision that you talk about. But I've done quite a lot of work on the sort of evidence base around land sparing and land sharing. And it's scientific fact that generally land sharing practices have lower yields than land sparing practices. And if we were to move to an entirely land sharing model across the whole of the UK, we would produce less food. that risks offshoring our food production to other countries unless we drastically change what we eat as a country. All of these like messages are very, like I say, nuanced and tricky to fit into a headline or whatever. So how do we, and you know, and it risks riling people up, like Anna's just said, if you start talking only about agroecological farming, you lose all of that nuance. How do we communicate with nuance, but still in a sort of snappy, engaging way?
Humphrey.
Yeah, I mean, strong question. We're going to add another layer of nuance, I'm afraid. The vision should be even more nuanced. And to answer your question about land sharing versus land sparing, actually, we also need a large-scale shift towards more plants and fewer animals. It's not an eradication of animals altogether, but if we did have loads more horticulture, loads less ground down to grazing and animal feeds, actually, and loads more small-scale dairy, horticulture, arable, a land sharing vision is entirely compatible with a diet that feeds 65 million people. Obviously, we're not talking about eliminating imports altogether or exports altogether, but shifting away from the currently high import ratio that we have. And you know, it's kind of about like how much airtime you give agriculture. Like, if actually you had slightly more sort of like airtime given to it in the media, you'd actually have time for these debates like we're having now to unfold a bit, rather than, you know.
I'm really sorry, we've run out of our airtime ourselves now. Thank you so much. Clearly, this is a huge topic that we could debate all afternoon, but thank you very much, Dimitri, Anna, and Humphrey, and thank you as our audience for your questions and your attention. So have a good afternoon. I think there's a 15-minute break now, so thank you.